Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Tuesday, the 15th of July. I'm Caroline Hepker in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Brussels. Coming up today, the UK's Chancellor Rachel Reeves will face the city for her first major speech since her tearful appearance in Parliament sparked a bond market sell-off.
Nvidia gets the green light to resume certain AI chip sales to China after a dramatic White House reversal.
Plus, targeting Boeing and Bourbon, the EU finalises a new tariff retaliation list hitting American goods worth $84 billion if a trade deal can't be reached.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Britain's Chancellor Rachel Reeves will pledge to cut red tape in her annual speech to London's financial sector in a bid to help drive the government's growth plans. Reeves is expected to say that dialling up risk will allow more families access to mortgages. It'll be the Chancellor's first major public speech since UK assets sold off less than 2 weeks ago when she appeared visibly upset in Parliament. But since then, the city has grown increasingly wary of taxes down the line. Bloomberg's James Woolcock has the story.
Chancellor Reeves's Mansion House dinner could be mistaken for tapas. There are many small plates on offer to the financial sector, a concierge service for international investors, reforms to the financial ombudsman and a new captive insurance regime. And the city has been teased with hopes for a review of ring-fencing rules and possibly an entrepreneur's visa system. But despite these tasty morsels around deregulation and growth, many in the world of finance see the government's fiscal worries. I wonder if the bill is going to be coming later in the autumn budget. In London, James Woolcock, Bloomberg Radio.
Well, the Chancellor's speech comes as the UK economy shows more signs of rebounding from its recent slump. June's retail sales figures rose by 3.1% from a year earlier, according to data from the British Retail Consortium. It's a positive signal after US tariffs, tax increases and a minimum wage hike drove back-to-back contractions in retail sales in April and May.
Nvidia is preparing to resume sales of high-end AI chips to China after getting the green light from the Trump administration. The H20 chip was designed specifically by Nvidia to comply with earlier US trade restrictions, but has been banned from sale in the country since April. In a blog post, the tech giant says that US officials have now told them they will approve export licenses. Gene Munster of Deepwater Asset Management says the move comes after weeks of thawing relations between Beijing and Washington.
My suspicion is that some of this semi-trade truce, I'm reluctant given everything that's going on to call it that, but that we have seen between the U.S. and China probably laid the groundwork a few weeks ago that this in fact was going to happen with Nvidia. And so what does it mean? What is the Trump administration essentially saying is that they have to give something to get something.
Gene Munster adds the US reversal is a significant win for Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang. He had previously branded Washington's chip curbs a failure that fueled the rise of Huawei and other Chinese AI rivals.
Some more data now. China's economy grew faster than expected in the second quarter. GDP rose by 5.2% after a gain of 5.4% in the first 3 months of the year. However, strong exports to markets outside the US masked deepening pressure from weak domestic demand within China. Despite a raft of government subsidies, excess manufacturing capacity and weak confidence in the property sector continued to suppress Chinese consumption.
US President Donald Trump has threatened to impose severe tariffs on Russia if it does not end the war with Ukraine. The news comes as the US pledges fresh weapon supplies for Kyiv, which Trump says will be paid for by NATO member states. Speaking during a meeting with NATO's Secretary General at the White House, Trump set out a timeline for the Russian president.
I'm disappointed in President Putin because I thought we would have had a deal 2 months ago, but it doesn't seem to get there. So based on that, we're going to be doing secondary tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. It's very simple. And they'll be at 100%.
President Trump speaking during a meeting with NATO's Mark Rutte there. Matt Whitaker, the US ambassador to NATO, says the planned action effectively represents secondary sanctions on countries that are buying oil from Russia. The president didn't elaborate on the powers he would use to impose those tariffs, but said he wasn't sure if congressional approval would be needed.
Bloomberg understands that the European Union has finalised a second list of US tariff countermeasures targeting goods worth €72 billion. The list includes Boeing aircraft and Bourbon, as well as additional duties on machinery products, chemicals and plastics, medical devices, wines and other agricultural goods. Our senior White House correspondent Josh Wingrove says Europe is a significant market for President Trump.
And the question is, of course, will they land somewhere, or will Trump look at wherever they are in a week or two and think that that's either not enough and stick with the 30%, or it is enough and go to a lower number? Remember, of course, the baseline number right now is 10%. He initially announced 20% on Europe in those initial Liberation Day tariffs. He's threatened as high as 50% on Europe, and is always, that's been kind of one of the top of the list places that he's complained about when he talks about unfair trade relationships.
Bloomberg's Josh Wingrove there on Trump's EU tariff plans. EU member states still need to give their approval, though, before the European list is adopted. The measures are a response to President Trump's earlier so-called reciprocal tariff of 20% hitting most goods, and the additional levies on cars and car parts of 25%. The universal rate was later temporarily lowered to 10% to allow negotiations to take place.
France's Prime Minister will outline a plan today to sharply narrow the country's budget deficit. The move by François Bayrou sets the stage for a parliamentary battle that risks triggering another government collapse. The Prime Minister will present details of around €40 billion in spending cuts and tax increases for next year. The proposals are aimed at shrinking the euro area's largest budget gap as France's fiscal difficulties continue to rattle bond markets. Earlier this month, the country's 5-year bond yield surpassed Italy's for the first time in 20 years.
And those are our top stories for you this morning. So let's think about markets which are really focused on the US inflation data. There are a number of other countries reporting CPI, but the US is the most significant, coming out at 1:30 p.m. Clues on the impact of Trump tariffs in June and the direction, of course, of interest rates. In terms of the market response, at the moment, the MSCI Asia Pacific Index has been swinging between small gains and losses, so a lot of hesitation. Japan's 10-year government bond yields are climbing to its highest level since 2008. You've also got corporate earnings season, though, really taking hold. JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Citi and BlackRock all due to report today. Subdued expectations. So do we see some big beats there? And Bitcoin, we saw a surge above $120,000 on Monday. We are below that, 117,000 this morning. So a pretty incredible run, though, for Bitcoin over the course of this year, something like 27%. Those are the markets.
In a moment, we'll look ahead to tonight's Mansion House speech from the Chancellor and bring you the latest on the EU-US trade dispute. But another story we've been reading this morning. Now, Caroline, it's been a long time since I owned a car, but every time I rent one, I am sort of mystified by the block of plastic that I get handed at the counter, because keys are out, fobs are in. Everyone else knows this except me, like you, who drives regularly. But apparently this is something that now has become a key design feature of high-end cars as well.
I love how this is described in Hannah Elliott's piece. It's like the handshake. You know, it gives you a little taste of what the car design is all about. You know, get it wrong and you can be severely punished by drivers, as you say. Yes, I think of you, Stephen, as the ultimate car-free European city dweller.
Although Belgians love cars, so you know, maybe things will change now that I'm in Brussels. You know, maybe I'll be finally tempted back onto the roads. But I like some of the designs in this piece of the kind of the fancy fobs are incredible. Like there's a Bentley one there. There's the Lotus Pebble, which is sort of a triangle. You know, there's a lot of effort now being put into designing what these things look like. They're meant to be a reflection of the vehicle. They don't always get it right. Hannah Elliott points out as well that there was a recent Cadillac model that kind of didn't go down very well because it was essentially just a plastic piece in a little leather wallet. People didn't feel reflected the luxury of the car.
And probably the price tag as well. I mean, look, even the key fob, though, might be going extinct because actually loads of the high-end cars just have apps now.
Open it with your mind, Caroline. That's going to be the next step, I think. You can read Hannah's piece on Bloomberg.com and on the terminal. We'll put a link to the article in our show notes as well. Well, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, makes her annual speech to London's financial industry later at Mansion House. A key moment for the sector, but also for the Chancellor for herself after the recent market jitters over her future. Our finance reporter Leo Kenshepper joins us now for more. Leo, good morning. What are the key announcements then we're expecting from the Chancellor?
Good morning, Stephen. Yes, so ahead of Rachel Reeves' annual Mansion House speech in the city, the Chancellor will actually be in Leeds first off and reveal measures to increase home ownership. And she will reveal, I think you said earlier as well, a permanent mortgage guarantee scheme and also more home loans for people on lower incomes. And then when she's in the city tonight, she is going to announce among various other things, a concierge service for international investors who want to put money into the UK, and that service will sort of help them navigate issues around visas and regulation. Another key measure that's hotly anticipated by many in the city is cutting the burden of the senior managers and certification regime, basically making it easier for financial institutions to appoint senior managers and shortening the regulatory review from 3 to 2 months. Those are some of the measures that are expected tonight.
Yeah, OK. So what are we expecting then? And might we get any announcements on tax? Because that's the other big worry.
Yes, exactly. That's the big one. So our understanding is to not expect any announcements on tax, but any signaling around wealth taxes, non-dom taxes, potential backtracking here would most likely be the biggest story out of the Mansion House speech. When I was talking to people in the city, asking them what they expect tonight, they would always ask the question back, what are you hearing about wealth taxes? That's definitely a big thorn in the side for many people in the city. The Lord Mayor, Alistair King, who is hosting the dinner tonight, told us a few weeks ago that the government really needs to stop the non-dom exodus, and many expect the Treasury to act eventually, but probably not today.
How significant is this moment for Rachel Reeves after we had that recent gilt market sell-off?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it definitely is a big moment for her. I'd say not necessarily for the gilt market, because there are no fiscal measures expected. I was talking to gilt market participants, and they're not necessarily waiting with bated breath for what Reeves is going to say. But I think it's key for her to maintain her support from people in the city, from executives. She was off to a good start, praised by CEOs of asset managers, for instance, for her growth agenda. But the non-dom exodus and also relatively slow movement around issues such as the reform of ISAs, the individual savings accounts, that has definitely irritated some of her early supporters in the city.
Interesting. Yeah. So Rachel Reeves speaking tonight at the Mansion House dinner, but also the Bank of England Governor, Andrew Bailey, will be delivering his annual speech at that event too. Leo, thank you so much for looking ahead to what's happening today. Our finance reporter, Leo Kensherper.
Now, the European Union has finalised a second list of countermeasures targeting American goods worth €72 billion if it decides to retaliate as transatlantic trade tensions intensify. The EU is still hopeful it can negotiate a deal to avoid the 30% levy threatened by Donald Trump. Let's bring in our EMEA News Director, Rosalind Matheson, for more on this as well. First, Ros, just on what we've been hearing from Donald Trump. He's indicated he's open to more talks with the EU, but is there any sign of actually any progress?
Well, it does make it a bit harder when Donald Trump says that his letters laying out tariff rates are actual deals, because they're not. It's the US imposing a tariff rate. So that's the climate in which a lot of countries are trying to negotiate or work out how to negotiate with the US and the path forward. There's been lots of rounds of talks between the EU and the US. There are more to come. The EU trade negotiator, Maros Sefcovic, was due to talk last night with the US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. So we'll see how that went. He's also warned that while they have to prepare for all outcomes, that this proposed duty, he said, is quite effectively prohibitive for transatlantic trade. The preference is still for a deal. I mean, there's wrangling between the EU. Some of the bigger states are saying, should we do a deal for the sake of it? Should we insist it has to be a good one no matter what? But the general feeling is they want a deal. They want to avoid tipping into an even bigger trade conflict. And that's very much also the view that they're getting from business in the EU.
Yeah, let's see, of course, how long maybe that lasts, because the EU's been very careful not to antagonise President Trump with retaliation so far. But let's see if that is a strategy that continues or not. I also want a quick word, though, on what is going on with Russia. The US president has threatened big tariffs on Russia, up to 100% if it doesn't end hostilities with Ukraine. Now, will that tactic work with Vladimir Putin, Ros?
Well, that is the question. Obviously, it's a signal of just how frustrated Donald Trump is that there's no movement towards a ceasefire in Ukraine, and now very much training his sights on Putin in all of that. But the Russian economy is already very heavily sanctioned, including by the US. It seems like it was a bit unclear what Donald Trump was saying last night, but it suggests that he's talking about perhaps further tariffs on Russia goods, and Russia doesn't export a lot to the US, but primarily talking about secondary sanctions, which would penalize countries like China and India for buying Russian energy. Of course, that they've bought quite a lot in recent years, and that's helped fund the war in Ukraine. And that would be a design to squeeze the Russian economy further. But you'd have to say that with all this pressure that's gone on, and Donald Trump saying that he's talking with Vladimir Putin all the time and Vladimir Putin wants a deal, there's no great sign that Vladimir Putin wants a deal on Ukraine, that he doesn't want to keep pressing on with his war aims there regardless. And that's despite many years of economic squeeze. Would this change his course in Ukraine? It's very hard to say. Would it hurt the Russian economy further? Absolutely. But Vladimir Putin seems to be quite willing to wear a lot of economic pain to further his goals in Ukraine.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.